Good afternoon.
Hi,
Where
Sheldon.
we,
Yeah, it's good afternoon.
afternoons are always good.
I think so.
After you got what, five coffees in you?
Yeah, but I find I don't really get up and running until about, I'd say, around 9 o'clock at night. That's when I really start getting alert and ready to roll. Unfortunately, it's time to quit then.
Yeah. I always do my best work between like 1 and 2 a.m. And
It seems I do my best thinking between about 2 and 4 a.m.
oh
while
yeah,
laying in bed trying to get to sleep.
yeah. If you need to get to sleep, that's when you're thinking really, really deep.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. But when you actually comes time to sit down and put something on the screen,
Mhm.
that's when I find I can sleep best.
Exhausting, exhausting. Got a daughter at the dental office. She's getting some wisdom teeth taken out. And
Ouch.
yeah, no fun.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting there, computer on my lap, trying to get some work done. I was working on that YouTube thumbnail today, and I'm falling asleep as it's happening. And one of the people beside me was like, "Yeah, I was thinking I should grab your computer so it doesn't fall off your lap while you're nodding off." So if
Yeah.
anybody wants to know why the YouTube isn't great, it's because I was sleeping while I was doing it.
Yeah. I've got a lot of complaints about that, Sheldon, just in the last half hour or so.
Good. Yeah, just put them in that box beside my desk. It's labeled recycling.
Yeah.
All
That
right.
round bin.
Yeah. So before we get into the responses to the your response to the response to Wes's response to the, why don't we talk a little bit about what happened with the whole Wes Huff um, thing that blew up just before Christmas. There might be the odd person that really doesn't know who Wes is, what happened, any of that, but I think it's fascinating, absolutely fascinating what all happened. And so, why don't we just give a little background? Who is Wes? You've worked with them.
Yeah. No, Wes is a former colleague of mine, and I really like the guy. He is a sharp fellow. He's doing a PhD in mostly focusing on New Testament manuscripts. And up until about 2 months ago, he was a relatively unknown person in the online world. And in the past 2 months, he's become maybe one of the most well-known Christian apologists in the world, and among a handful. But it all started with a kind of an informal discussion slash debate he had with Billy Carson that was actually put on by another fellow. And it didn't go so well for Billy Carson. And he wanted to stop it from going online, and that, of course, just ramped up the curiosity. And then there was all sorts of unfortunate things being said behind the scenes, slamming Wes, lying and all this kind of stuff. So finally, Wes had no choice really but to actually upload it and put it online, and it just exploded. And I don't know what, it's got way over 1 million views now. I'm not sure what it is. I'm being very conservative by saying over 1 million. And then the next thing you know, he got invited on Joe Rogan, and who's got, I don't know, more than 13 million subscribers, I think. And from then on, it just exploded. But on Joe Rogan, of course, whenever you stick your neck out and you're talking for 3 hours straight, I know from the perspective of having spoken on many university campuses over the last 40 years and always having a Q&A at the end. Thank goodness there's a Q&A at the end. I highly recommend Q&As at the end, because what that does is it allows all the maybe nonsense things that might have slipped out. It allows the crowd to call you on that and ask you to clarify and stuff, and which you can do. Now, in the case of Wes on Joe Rogan, of course, there's no opportunity to really do that in the moment. But after that, it exploded. A number of large online or YouTube influencers began to either really praise that or speak highly of that interview, but some were actually critiquing it. And of course, Alex O'Connor is one of those. And Alex O'Connor himself has well over 1 million subscribers. And in the course of his critique, he mentioned a number of things. But I would say it appeared to me, and I know that, of course, not everybody would agree, but it appeared to me that Alex O'Connor himself made a massive mistake in getting the Bible wrong in a particular, the idea that Jesus never claimed to be God in the Synoptic Gospels. So then I produced a little video. I just posted it yesterday, about 24 hours ago. Of course, I'm not famous, but there has been at least, let's see, right now, about 1.7K views in the last 24 hours, mostly today. So it has sparked some real interest and some criticisms in the comment section, if you look at the comment section. And so I thought, hey, we should actually address these criticisms, just talk about it.
So while we're doing this, continue to load up the comment section with your comments. We will try and get to as many of them as we can, both on this video, and if you want to go back to the old one and comment there, feel free. There's a bunch that we'll address. We'll get into some pretty detailed stuff, but before we get into specifically around whether it's dealing with specific wording, I just want to get into a little bit of a broader topic, because it's really easy to say, okay, Jesus never claimed that he was God. Did he walk around going, I'm God, I'm God, I'm God? Well, that's a quick way to get people to go, stay away from that guy.
Yeah.
Like, I've been around some people that obviously were struggling with mental illness on the streets of Vancouver who claimed to be God.
Yeah, I've run into a few myself.
Yeah, so like, I think there's a reason Jesus didn't just walk around going, I'm God, I'm God, I'm God, and starting with that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he had a plan, although the hints were there right from the beginning. But if you actually look at when does he actually start coming right out and saying and using the name of God as who he is, that's most of those, not all of them, but most of them are in the final few weeks of his ministry. So it's just leading up to the climax, which I argue occurred in front of the entire Jewish council. But yeah.
But if I'm an NHL hockey player or an NFL football player, I'm not leading with, when I'm early in my career, I'm an NFL football player. You're proving that you can be an NFL football player. And when I look at the story that's written in the Bible from Genesis all the way through, there's themes and stories and prophecies and all sorts of stuff going on.
Yeah.
We're going to get into some detail on some specific verses. But if it wasn't for all the prophecies that were being fulfilled and all the other stuff that's happening, whether it's Daniel 7 or other stuff,
mm-hmm.
You could say this person is nuts.
Yeah, I mean,
but because all that other stuff happened, all you really need for him to do is prove that he's God.
And he's the one that the prophets have been talking about for thousands of years. Mm-hmm. So that's the context. Whereas the guys that I meet, and some of them are well-dressed, well-behaved university students, not very often, but two actually claimed they were God, and I'm not entirely sure they were just joking.
Well, Billy Carson thinks he's God.
In his own way of God, yeah.
In a specific type of God.
In his own, yeah. So this didn't happen. Jesus didn't appear in a vacuum, like just suddenly dropped into human history with no warning, no context, and start actually inform the religious leaders that God is standing right there in the room in front of them, which I would argue that's exactly what happened on the night of the trial. Although a lot of people dispute that, and I'm well aware of that, so that's part of what we need to talk about. But yeah, there was a context that led up for centuries before he appeared.
So, well, let's get into the claim that was made, the agreement that was made on that claim, and why even just it's so important that, because I think even in the interview with Wes Huff, it had come up that, okay, there's the book of John might not actually be that old. And so, like, I think there's a lot of hope on the one side that the book of John is really old, because that's the only one that really claimed where Jesus claimed to be God. The other ones, because they didn't, it's pretty clear that it came up after.
Yeah.
But
yeah, that's the theory.
So, which, again, if you ignore the rest of the Bible, would be a really good argument.
Yeah. Yeah, the idea that the Messiah would also be God himself did not originate, let's say, decades or many decades or even a century or so later after the time of Christ. That was already there, and we're actually going to look at one or two examples of that in the Old Testament. But just as a side issue, anybody who is really interested in the question of who wrote the Gospels and were the eyewitnesses, I highly recommend this book right here, and specifically the second edition. In the second edition, he actually addresses some criticisms that were raised against his arguments in the first edition. So just as an aside with regard to who wrote the Gospels, were they eyewitnesses, and what's all this about developing the Christological, mythical, whatever, in the century or so that followed Christ.
And if anybody's interested, like, if you haven't watched the Wes Huff one talk with Billy Carson, like, I didn't know who Billy Carson was to begin before that debate. I don't follow conspiracy theories, so
No.
I had no idea who this guy was. But he's famous. He's got a million plus followers, and I would say, now that I know a little bit more about him, he's close to a cult leader. Like, there are people that follow this guy religiously.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it's been amazing seeing some of the comment sections going, I used to be a follower of Billy Carson.
Yeah.
Okay. And so seeing them go, hey, wow, Wes Huff really opened my eyes to what was going on here.
And I think Billy Carson is an illustration, or perhaps an example of why Jesus didn't just suddenly show up on the scene and announce he's God, apart from whatever his plan was. It's simply this, as I have come to believe over the course of my life, that people will believe anything. There's always a subset of people who will believe anything for all the wrong reasons, or for no reason at all, for some emotional appeal or whatever. And that is important to avoid. Like, Jesus actually had some pretty stiff criteria, if you want to follow him, that needed to be satisfied with regard to denying your own, everything you think gives you self-worth, significance, and so forth. But Billy Carson, I did know about him ahead of time, but I never really watched any of his stuff. It was just so wildly out there, that I just don't have time to waste watching that kind of thing. But then I found out Wes Huff was on the show, and I thought, oh goodness, like, Billy Carson is in deep trouble. The moment I heard, before I even watched anything. And it was pretty clear that Billy Carson didn't even have, like in chess, you make your initial move, and then there's the next move, and then the one after that. Billy Carson didn't even have the very next move. There was no move. He just said stuff with not even the ability to follow through with the first move in defense. And
Yeah, no, he would claim that he was deathly ill and all of these different things. But as many people said, if you really know your stuff, you don't even really have to be awake.
exactly.
to talk
And
about it.
Joe Rogan made that point. You could wake me up at 4 a.m, and if it's something that I'm an expert in, like just give me a few seconds to regain consciousness, and I will tell you that. And I would have to say, there is no such thing as an ambush if you really know your stuff. You should welcome an ambush.
Especially when you claim to be one of the world-renowned experts on it.
And he did do that. Like, I just about fell off my chair once again when I saw him say that. But Wes Huff really got attacked for a major what he said about Isaiah and scroll and the Masoretic text. But I want to let the viewers know that he then published, how's it called? A Wes Huff responds to Wes Huff video. And he just totally owned that, he responded to that in a way that I think gives street creds to Wes Huff. And people can see, hey, this guy, if he overstates something, he's going to own that. He's willing to say, yep, that was overstated. But at the same time, he also gives some, it wasn't just out of the blue, he gave some reasons why he stated what he did.
Well, he was quoting people. He quoted literally people saying that it was a word for word.
Yeah, he was quoting, there was a couple of scholars he referenced who, but
and he also claimed he wasn't an expert in those.
Yeah, that's more the Hebrew manuscripts, and Wes's specialty is in the ancient Greek manuscripts, mostly, although not just Greek. And if you're interested in seeing Wes Huff's response, where Wes Huff responds to Wes Huff, I have put a link to that in the video, in my video that we're following up on with this live stream.
Awesome. Well, again, if you are watching and you're interested in hearing an answer to any questions you might have that Kirk can answer, put it in the chat. But let's get into this. Where do we start here? What's the question that context here?
Yeah, well,
we're talking when Jesus is talking to the Council of Religious Authorities.
Yeah, well, the comments in the comment section are really objecting to Ehrman and O'Connor flat out asserting that nowhere in the Synoptic Gospels does Jesus say that he is God or claim to be God. Nowhere. Now, in philosophy, we would call that a strong claim or a strong premise. And one of the things in philosophy you probably want to avoid as much as you can is making strong claims. It's better to make a weak claim and then come up with your rational justification for that, and then the observer says, hey, that's not as weak a claim as he initially made it out to be. So both Ehrman and O'Connor, or I think O'Connor just is in good faith repeating what Ehrman said. I don't think O'Connor, he has just enough knowledge of the Bible to be conversant in it, and he does a good job of that. But there is this old phrase, he knows just enough to be dangerous, and I would adapt that here. He knows just enough about the Bible to get into trouble if he's up against someone like Ehrman, because Ehrman knows what it's saying, and he is making statements that are, in my view, hyperbolic as well, that are overstating things, as if everybody agrees there's no dissension here. And I should acknowledge, because one of the commentators says this is not just a fringe view that Ehrman has. No, it isn't, and I agree. It's not just a fringe view, and there's a whole history behind this view that goes back to the 1800s. And it's partially, or a major part of that is what's something called form criticism. And I don't have the time to go dive into that right now. But there were some assumptions made about how the New Testament Gospels came together. And within the context of those assumptions, then all sorts of speculation could arise and premises put forward. And that contradict or compete with a straightforward understanding of what those Gospels actually say. So that's the question that I am addressing here. Did Jesus inform the whole council? Because that's in my video. I stated that Jesus didn't, I don't like to say he just merely claimed to be God. He stood in front of the ruling religious leaders, and the word there is whole council. The Greek word is Sanhedrian, from which we get our English word Sanhedrin. He stood up before the whole religious council of Jewish leaders in Israel, and he informed them, I don't say just claimed, he informed them that he is none other than I am, the Most High God who will appear in history as a Son of Man. And they just lost it. They just tore their robes. And I point to that as an indication of how we should interpret. But then the comments, say not necessarily so. And so here we are in this live stream here.
So
Yeah,
I'll
there
just
it is.
pull these up as
Yeah.
as I go through here. So this is the first one that really challenged you, and it came a whole one
Yep.
comment after you posted something. So let's get into Mark is dead. I'm assuming that's how you pronounce it. And yeah, you did comment back in this thread, that just in case people don't drill in, let's talk about this.
Yeah, and Mark is Dead raised some very good criticisms, and I say they're very good because they're not just Mark's criticisms. They are, in general, criticisms that would be raised against what I said by many New Testament scholars, but there's also another stream of New Testament scholars that would agree with me. William Craig, I just saw him speak on this very thing yesterday.
Was that the one with Sean McDowell?
Yes, that interview there. He actually...
About halfway through that one, it was...
Yeah, I didn't watch the whole thing. I skimmed it, Sometimes 2x is not fast enough. But it's good stuff, by the way. That discussion, anytime William Craig is addressing the New Testament controversies of any way, shape, or form, I like to hear what William Craig has to say. He got his PhD in, while focusing on the historical evidence for the resurrection. And I think, if I recall correctly, his supervisor at the University of, was it Munich? The German university was Wolfhard Pannenberg. No, don't jump on me if I'm wrong. I'm just going from my memory, which looking back decades now when I first looked into that. So let's get to Mark is Dead here. And he is arguing essentially that the fact that the chief priests and the Sanhedrin in general just lost it. The chief priest tears his clothes. He says, "You have heard his blasphemy." He's arguing that the word blasphemy doesn't necessarily mean that Jesus claimed to be God, because the word blasphemy can be used in a variety of ways. And so, and he's right. If you, in first century Koine Greek, if you, for example, look up that word blasphemios in BDAG, it's four guys' names, and everybody just calls it BDAG, BDAG. You will see that there's two major different meanings for the word blasphemy, and each of those has sub nuances of the meaning. And so the first thing we have to do is try and figure out, well, how is the chief priest, what sort of blasphemy is the chief priest claiming has just happened here? First of all, he's assigning it to Jesus. And so the question, I think, that the chief priest asked Jesus sets the context within which we can figure out what sort of blasphemy is being committed here. Because, for example, you could commit blasphemy by saying bad things about deity, for example. For example, Jesus suggested that the Pharisees were committing blasphemy or very close to it by claiming that the works that he did, which was by the Holy Spirit, were done by Beelzebub. So they're kind of claiming that the Holy Spirit is not really the Holy Spirit, he is Satan, so to speak. So they're saying derogatory things, but they didn't really know, I think. I think Jesus was just implying they're coming very close here, not actually doing it. So it's to say things about God or a deity in general. Now, the blasphemy could be applied to other things more broadly, but in the New Testament, it's primarily to say things about let's go broader still, a supernatural being. Could even be Satan. I think there's one instance where I'll have to look that one up. But anyways, so that's one kind of thing. So the chief priest asks this question. Jesus responds, and chief priest says he's committed blasphemy. And the question is, did Jesus say bad things about God or deity? And I don't think so. That doesn't match the question here. The question is really boils down to who are you? Who are you? And Jesus responds by telling them who he is. And so that's another form of blasphemy. Another form of blasphemy is to say you are God. And we know that that's a form of blasphemy because we read about that in the Bible. In fact, I think there's even another case in Mark chapter 2, verse 7, where Jesus isn't actually explicitly claiming to be God, but he's claiming to have the authority to forgive sins. And I want to do another little video on that because Alex O'Connor and Erman had a discussion on that I think needs to be responded to. But Jesus, and the guys are thinking, this is blasphemy. They use that word. So in this case, in Mark, and this I choose Mark because in Erman's mind, the Gospel of Mark is perhaps maybe the earliest and perhaps the most reliable, although I would hesitate to say Erman would use the word reliable, but at least it's not as bad as the Gospel of John. He would, and again, I'm paraphrasing, he would put it that way. So, so the question is Jesus, who's Jesus? He asks, who are you? The chief priest says, who are you? And Jesus tells them who he is, and then they say, you've committed blasphemy. And what we can infer from that, it's about something about who Jesus said he is. So what is that thing about who he said he is? So that narrows down the meaning of the word blasphemy here. It's Jesus' claim or statement about who he is. Now, if we back up just a minute and say, what if he just said yes? Because the question was, are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? Now, if he just said, being the Christ, which is the Jewish word Mashiach, and the Mashiach doesn't necessarily, it's not, in that first century, you weren't committing blasphemy by claiming to be the Messiah, if you were just talking about a human Messiah. And there were a number of examples of Messiah in the first century of people either claimed to be the Messiah or that people viewed as a Messiah. They weren't the real Messiahs, of course. Most of them, almost all of them, met a very unfortunate end, shall we say. But in this case, he just doesn't say the Christ, but he says the Son of the Blessed One. And that, if Jesus had just said yes to that question, because that's the question, they're trying to frame him. He's not saying a word. He's not answering their questions. And so the chief priest crafts a question that will put Jesus in checkmate. Is he the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One? And it's the Son of the Blessed One that is the key factor here. And if all Jesus had said was yes, then they would have still, I am sure, from the context, they just wanted to kill him. They believed he was committing blasphemy, and this was the way to set him up, put him in checkmate, command him to answer the question. And if all he said was yes, he would have still been accused of committing blasphemy. Why? Well, there's actually a passage, a psalm in the Old Testament where you see both the Messiah, God, and the Son of God all in the same psalm. And they would have known about that. So there were different possibilities of the Messiah. There was just your normal human Messiah who was amazing and led Israel into freedom and so forth. That would be a human Messiah. But this Messiah that's spoken of in Psalm chapter 2 is a little more impressive than that. And perhaps I should just work through that on a few phrases here. So I'll read it to you, and I quote, "Why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord." Now, the Hebrew word Lord there is Yahweh. That's the name of God, the same name he gives Moses in the burning bush. So that particular usage right there in that line is against, well, in English it's often referred as Yahweh or Jehovah. Why? Against the Lord and against his anointed. No, the Hebrew word there is Mashiach, and normally in English, Messiah. So here you have the word Messiah, and this Messiah has been anointed by the Most High God, saying, And the people are saying, let us burst their bonds apart. We don't have anything to do with God and his Messiah, so to speak. And then the Lord goes, and then it goes on, and I'll skip down here a little bit. Then the Lord said to me. Now, some people will say, oh, he's talking about the writer of the psalm here, but the stuff he's saying about the writer of the psalm and the context of what has to happen to qualify for this position of Messiah here, that disqualifies the writer of the psalm. But the Lord said to me, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. Now, interestingly enough, in the New Testament, in the book of Hebrews, this is quoted with reference to Jesus Christ. In other words, this isn't just me making stuff up here. This, in the first century, was seen to refer to the Father and the Son by the Christians, by the followers of Christ. But the Pharisees or the rulers of the council would have known about this. He says, you are my son, today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage and the ends of the earth your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron, dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Now therefore, O kings, be wise, be warned, O rulers of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear, rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son. Now that phrase, kiss the Son, in a lot of translations, what it really means is pay homage to the Son. Acknowledge that he is the king, not just the king, but the King of kings or the King of nations. So it says, pay homage to the Son, or kiss the Son, lest he be angry and you perish on the way, for his wrath is quickly kindled. Blessed are all who take refuge in him. So he's saying here, God is saying that the whole earth will be his Son's possession, this Messiah that he personally anoints, and he will rule them, all the nations, and the rulers of the earth are to pay homage to this person. So the Pharisees in the council would have known about that, and both Messiah and Son of the Blessed are stated in here or inferred in here when God says, you are my son, today I've begotten you. So when they ask that question, tell us, are you this kind of Messiah that everybody knew in the council was described in Psalm chapter 2? Because if you're going to say you're this kind of Messiah, then we have a major problem with that. You are claiming to be this begotten of God, the Son of God. And but he goes further than that. He goes a lot further than that. And then he makes two statements. And this is where more comments in the comments section really take issue with what Jesus then says to the high priest and to the whole council.
So we'll get into that, but I want to throw this one in there. So I've been around the church since I was a little kid. I've watched a lot of YouTube videos about Christianity from a perspective where they don't agree with the fact that Jesus existed, much less claim to be God. I find this comment, you must fall out of your chair with regularity if the suggestion that Jesus did not claim to be God in Mark is all it takes. I didn't realize this at all until you had brought up a video like 6 months ago. So this, I think, is somebody that's really been following that group of people, because it may be common around that group of people that are looking for very specific reasons to discount Christianity, but I don't think it's common for a lot of people to actually make the claim. Would that be a legitimate?
You mean a lot of people to make what claim? That Jesus is God,
Jesus
or
never
that?
claimed to be God.
Oh, never claimed to be God. Oh, I've heard it all the time for decades. Like it's just seems to be the norm when you're talking to people. But the reason that I was surprised to hear Ehrman just make a statement like that, a very strong statement like that, with complete confidence, in the style of, as I say in the video, Billy Carson, because Billy Carson would say stuff with complete confidence. The difference is, though, that Billy Carson, as we saw in his debate with Wes Huff, didn't really know what he's talking about. But I think Ehrman does. And when Ehrman knows, in the academic world, and I'm speaking, let's say, as a philosopher, when I write a paper and submit it to a journal, it's not good enough just to say, here's what I think. You also must raise the objections or respond to other people who are objecting to you. So you want to be a little more careful. It's usually bad form in the academic world to just come out and make a strong statement when you know there are objections out there and you know there are other scholars who would disagree. So when, let's say if I'm going to dig into something, if I'm going to say something, I'm going to speak in public, I not only want to know what supports what I'm going to have to say, but I also, in fact, I spend even more time reading what the opposition has to say. This is what Alex, I don't think, this shows no sign of having done. So this is where I don't think Alex did conduct his due diligence. I think he's become an acolyte of Bart Ehrman. And the reason that I say that is I went to Ehrman's website, and there I see Alex O'Connor's endorsement right there on the home page. I think it's the home page. Alex O'Connor's endorsing. Wow, I am very hesitant to endorse anything and anybody, because I know that sooner or later that person's going to mess up, and if my name's on that person, I'm going to pay the price. So Alex O'Connor has enough confidence in Ehrman, I think, to just accept what O'Connor says. I think Alex sees Bart Ehrman as the expert that he can consult with, and he doesn't need to fact check. But what Alex really does need to do is he really needs to go back and read some people who might disagree with what Ehrman says. Now, to Alex's credit, he has had an interview with William Lane Craig, and I commend him for that. So Alex doesn't just live in an echo chamber just listening to the stuff that supports what he thinks, but Alex does have people that say the contrary. But in this case, and I do say in my video, I think Alex just in good faith believed Ehrman because Ehrman is an expert in his mind, and away he goes. But it's Ehrman that surprised me by making such a, how would you call it, tone-deaf statement, tone-deaf to the other scholars out there who say, hold it, wait a sec, like William Lane Craig argues.
Okay, the claim that Ehrman made is the academic consensus. So it's a little silly for you to say you almost fell out of your chair hearing it. To believe in Christians, this can be a difficult thing to accept because literal centuries of post-biblical negotiation have taken place so that the majority of, though not all, Christians believe that Jesus was God. But as his creator shows in his video, he's having to read the God claim into the text. Jesus does not simply say, I am God. There are scenes in each of the Gospels in which Christians have read that claim. But it isn't really supported by the data. It would be fine if his creator made a video saying, I think these folks are wrong. But he's trying to say they're factually wrong. They ain't. It's important to remember the large number of early Christians who lived far closer to the time of Jesus' preaching specifically did not see Jesus as God. This view was held in Marcianism? How do you say that?
Marcianism.
And Arianism, both of which were viable early sects of Christianity. Without the stamp of approval given to Trinitarianism by the Roman Empire, it's not at all clear this view would have become the mainstream view of modern Christians.
Yeah. Okay, well, first of all, let me just quickly dispel that urban myth that it was Trinitarianism, or the idea that God is a Trinity was promoted by the Roman Empire. No, you see that in the Old Testament. I'd love to do an article sometime, and I've documented for years various passages in the Old Testament that speak of God as a divine being who is more than one, but yet one. That's a thing, and I know that people would say, "Well, what kind of a God is that? That's it's crazy." But my response is this: if you're going to make up a religion, you're jolly well going to make up one where you can explain the God. Nobody, when I look at all the other religions in the world that have originated in human thinking, they always come up with gods they can explain. And isn't that just a little bit suspicious? That the creator of the universe, the one who designed the laws of quantum mechanics, the one who set all of this thing in motion, thinks the same way we do, and it's so simple that a little, tiny little thing on this planet here should be able to explain God, and if I can't, then that God doesn't exist. No, it's quite the opposite. I argue that it's a mark of authenticity, that even in the Old Testament, even right from Genesis chapter 1, when God refers to himself as Elohim. In fact, there's an interesting passage there when he says, behold, the man has become like one of us. In Hebrew, if it's a group of people speaking, the conjugations will be plural as well. But in this case, you see something very interesting. You see Elohim is plural, but the conjugations are all in singular. And this continues on. You see, there's something different about this. But anyways, I digress.
Isn't that just a mistake that was added in later, Kirk?
Well, okay, people can say that, okay? There's such a thing in logic called the cavalier dismissal, where you just simply dismiss it out of hand or make up some response. But the response, you need to support that with an argument. And so people can just say, oh, they made it up later. Wait a sec here, I need an argument. I need some sort of rational justification for taking your suggestion seriously.
So we just got a comment about this kind of thing. Do you think that if Jesus spelled out I am God, modern skeptics would simply argue that that statement must have been added at a later time?
Oh, well, they already do, because what I've argued for years is that if Jesus just said, I am God in the first century, well, there's a problem here. There are the Greek gods, the Roman gods, there's the pagan gods. Yeah. You need to be a little more specific than that. So in Western society, we might say, oh, he's saying he's the creator of the universe. But in that society, you had to be more specific. So Jesus does one better than just saying, I am God. He says, before Abraham was born, I am. Ego eimi in Greek, and we'll get into that, but ego eimi, that is translated from whatever he said in Hebrew or Aramaic. And in Hebrew, it's Yahweh. That's his name. I am, that he said to Moses. So, but back to this question that Ehrman made as academic consensus. So I'm not falling out of my chair because it's the first time I ever heard this, as I already said. I have heard it for decades, literally, and I'm aware of this, and I've read the arguments. What I'm falling out of my chair about, as I already stated, is that we would have an academic who, in my mind, academically, stoops when he starts just making hyperbolic statements, strong claims, without acknowledging that there are other scholars who would disagree with him, without putting it on the table. He just says, now maybe to Ehrman's credit, if I recall correctly, in the initial video when he's telling Alex O'Connor this, I think he uses the phrase, I am convinced. Okay, that's a little bit better, but if as an academic, I would say, well, I am convinced, but here's why. And in my video, I say, I am convinced that Jesus officially informed the religious leaders of the Jews on the night before his crucifixion that he is none other than the Most High God who would appear in history in appearance as a Son of Man. That's what I'm convinced of, but of course I then have to back that up. I can say, here's my reasons, which is a little bit are given in the video, but in a 7.5 minute video you can't really dive into this. But fortunately, we have this live stream here. So another thing about consensus. Okay, I've got graduate degrees in philosophy, in science, and that doesn't. The word consensus no longer impresses me. That's something that, say, a lay person will use, I think, or somebody with a weak argument will use, if they notice that the consensus is such and such or such and such. Now, throughout history, the history of science and philosophy, say archaeology, and even the academic discipline of history itself, there have been reigning paradigms that were embraced by the vast majority of scholars at the time, and then those paradigms fell. They were falsified. And it would be naive to just appeal, well, the current reigning paradigm, and I would say that paradigm is eroding, and I say that on the basis of my personal discussions with scholars, mostly in the UK, that consensus is eroding, and at least it's getting harder to defend, that he never claimed to be God. That's getting harder to defend because of some excellent academic work done by the dissenting scholars and publishing them in peer-reviewed journals or books. Let's say if you want to read about his treatment of, or his refutation of form criticism, and he actually references that he, in his view, he thinks the consensus of scholars today have, they realize that form criticism has been rebutted, but they still continue to publish and work and do their research as if it's not been refuted, as if it's still, the consequences are still there.
Well,
So
but it supports their worldview.
that's an important
I
point.
think that's probably the biggest thing, is the reason that there's an academic consensus is the same as there's an academic consensus around scientists and evolution and scientists and this, and it supports the worldview that they believe.
Yeah.
So if they don't have that consensus, they go against what they want to believe.
Yep. That's a very important point, Sheldon, that we're not talking about a topic here that no one really cares about, and everybody are just approaching the research completely objectively. Nothing's at stake here. There are no philosophical implications. It could be like, what kind of bacteria live on that bur oak tree out there? Like, nobody really has any emotional ties to any particular theory. We're not talking about that here. We're talking about politics and religion. And politics and religion, it's pretty much everybody has a bias here.
Wars over those.
Yeah, and in fact, the biases sometimes are extremely strong. So, of course, you know my bias, but my bias has not been my starting point. My bias started, well, bias. You know, sooner or later, you're going to, there's a number of really interesting things to discuss here. One is that when you have two competing views, it's almost never the case that both views have equal merit. Almost never this, at least in the academic world when you're really diving into stuff. Usually one has a much stronger case than the other, but for the lay person, and I see this all the time, they will say, well, even if they do admit that maybe the consensus is this, but here's another fairly significant group that would disagree. So I see this all the time. Somebody will say, well, A is the case, and somebody else will say, well, but some people don't agree with that. They say that not A is the case. And what happens in the mind of the listener is that somehow they assume that the weight for either case now is suddenly equal. They're equal weight here. That is most of the time a false assumption. They're not equally weighted.
And that's why when Wes Huff and Billy Carson had their conversation, Wes Huff kept going back to, what is your methodology to determine what is real and what isn't? Is it just somebody said something? Or is there a lot of things that you have done to validate it? And if it's not validated, don't believe it yet.
Yeah. I'd say about back in the 1980s when I first started diving into this and reading what, the different views, I was shocked at how weak many of these arguments that the consensus of scholars put forward. How weak, and I think, hey, here's one. Just check out ChatGPT and what it says about form criticism and what its problems are. Now, you realize you can't trust ChatGPT for everything. In fact, the other night, I caught it red-handed making stuff up. And I confronted ChatGPT. I says, hey, the probability of this is extremely low. You're making stuff up. And it admitted it. And apologized. And I thought, man, this is lame that ChatGPT is making stuff up. But back to this is that you will see that it's the historical basis, the historical evidence for this idea that the four Gospels, when they were written down, only emerged after a long period of time of oral tradition in many different Christian communities. The historical evidence for that is really pretty much non-existent. It's very weak. I won't say non-existent. That would be a strong claim, but I say it's very weak compared to the evidence that somebody was taking notes when Jesus was traveling around making for 3.5 years, speaking to thousands. It's recorded sometimes. There was somebody actually taking some notes. scattered notes here and there, and then later on putting them together in the same way that, for example, Richard Bauckham mentions Flavius Josephus. Josephus says that in the wars against the Jews, 67 and 70 AD, and finally the collapse of Jerusalem, that Josephus took notes. He was recording lots of bits and pieces, and then he said later on, when he retired to Rome, then he produced his book, the Annals. And all the evidence supports this. When you start actually critically examining the consistency between all these New Testament manuscripts and manuscript fragments that we're finding that are in Greek, Syriac, Latin, there's a consistency here that could only occur if there was a very early record that people could refer to that would keep things on track, rather than just a whole pile of different communities passing things on through oral tradition. Anyways, we could talk more about the oral tradition, because even form criticism, and again, Richard Bauckham talks in more detail about that, there's different kinds of oral traditions and different ways they are passed on, and some are much more rigorous and stringent than others. But I digress.
Are we done with this comment?
Yeah, that's, I really do need to say something about his actual claim before the Sanhedrin, because I got a lot of criticism on that. Let's say agoimi. So when Jesus responds
there's a comment specifically on that here.
Yeah, there's a few of them. Mark as dead raises some. There's a number of people who raise the ego eimi objection. So
pick it out here.
Yeah, so when Jesus responds to the question, and I quote, he said, "I am, and you shall see the Son of Man sitting at the right." Let me get this right here. I am, I'm quoting from the English Standard Version, "and you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven." That's his statement. So I argue that he's making two claims to deity here, and the reason that one is very obvious, the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven, and I would argue, I have to say why I think it's obvious. And the second one is I am, that's his statement, I am, without saying I am this or I am that. So the objection to that, the criticism of that is that, well, in the Greek, what he's saying there is ego eimi. And ego eimi is a common phrase in Greek, and normally it has no special significance at all as a claim to deity or whatever. And that's true, that's right. So you see lots of places where Jesus will use that phrase. Jesus and others use the phrase ego eimi in Greek to say, I am the way, the truth, and the life, or in English at least. But when you look at some of those instances, you will see a very unusual reaction. And that tells you that he said something in Hebrew or Aramaic that when you translate it to ego, that is translated as ego eimi. So somehow what you really have to look at is when you see ego eimi, or I am in Greek, you have to ask the question, well, what was this translated from? What was said in the Hebrew or the Aramaic? And in order to answer that question, you have to look at the context and the response of the people in the situation when he said that. And when you look at the vast majority of usages of ego eimi in the New Testament, you will see that in the vast majority of cases, it doesn't mean anything special. It's just part of what you say, the present tense of the verb to be, and you're saying something in Greek. But those times when it does mean something special, that's very different. They often accuse him of blasphemy, as in this case. They pick up stones to stone him. Another very interesting case occurs, I think it's in Luke, where he says, they come to arrest him in the garden, and he says, "Who are you looking for?" And they say, they tell him that they're looking for Jesus, and he says, "I am." In Greek, it's just ego eimi. And what you notice there is this cohort, and the cohort was around 600 soldiers. They immediately fall back into the ground. What in the world's going on here? All he said is acknowledge. In Greek, all he's doing is saying, "Well, I'm the guy you're looking for." That's basically what you would think he's saying. But when you see the reaction, then you say, oh, wait a sec, this phrase ego, me, or I am, he must be making a different kind of statement there for a moment, for a flash of a nanosecond. He is revealing that he is the Most High, the creator of the universe. And for a flash there, they just fall back and hit the ground. And then they all climb back up to their feet, and he says, basically, let's get on with this. So he gives them permission to arrest him, and then what goes on after that. So we have to acknowledge that, yes, but the context tells you what he's saying in Aramaic or Hebrew. And in this case, you see the results. You see what the chief priest understood him to be saying when he's basically asking, who are you? Are you this person over here, the Son of the Blessed One?
So in this comment, I found it in, I think, Squilsify, says, Kirk, like all apologists, will try and use context. How dare you, Kirk? Use context. And that BS about sophistry came off as hypocritical. To hand wave away the fact that, as Ehrman and O'Connor correctly stated, Jesus never claims to be God in the first few Gospels.
No, that is
use context when you can just take these two words in this one sentence
from Ehrman and O'Connor. Like they know. Well, let me say something about this though. This actually, with all due respect, is funny, and here's why. Because Ehrman and O'Connor and myself and all scholars, we're working from the same data set. What the Greek New Testament Gospels say. That's the data we're looking at. And I just marvel at this, because when I am doing an exegetical analysis of a passage of Scripture, most words actually have more than one meaning. Most words in Greek and Hebrew have more than one, especially Greek, more than one meaning. And so you always have to look at context to figure out which meaning is the one that fits within this context. So when Squilsify says try to use context, that's wow. I mean, it's what the scholars use to determine this. Now, he might respond by saying, well, and so Ehrman has done his homework, and in the context he thinks Jesus is not claiming to be God. And I respond by, wait a sec here, look at the high chief priest. Look at his response here. He's saying Jesus just committed blasphemy, not because he's saying negative things about God, but he's saying he's making a claim about who he is, and that's the blasphemous portion. It reminds me of a couple of other passages where Jesus is, he says one time they're going to stone him. This is in the Gospel of John. And he says, why are you going to, which one of my miracles you want to stone me for? And they say, not for anything that you have done, but because you, being a man, make yourself out to be God. So the consistent accusations of blasphemy made about Jesus Christ in Mark, in the Gospel of Mark, which Urban would say was the earliest one, and in the latest one, the Gospel of John, which we have a very good historical case to say was written by the eyewitness, the disciple that Jesus loved. They're sandwiched in between the two, the earliest, the latest, both of them. Jesus, when he uses that phrase, I am, in some circumstances, there's an immediate reaction of blasphemy, and it's not because he said something nasty about God, it's about what he's saying about himself, that he is God. And so it's very difficult. In fact, the arguments that he's not actually saying this really amount to hand-waving and sophistry. And I mentioned sophistry. Most people aren't actually aware of what sophistry is, and that's very unfortunate, because we're up to our eyeballs in it in today's culture. Everywhere we look is sophistry.
I know you want to get into Daniel 7 a little bit, so why don't we end with this comment? At least this video. We might do another one next week. We'll see.
Yeah, we can continue.
But, I don't want to read this whole thing, but he basically says that Daniel 7, that he's not talking about God.
Yeah.
So, let's bring up Daniel 7.
Yeah, so, they can say he's not talking about God. So, again, we all are working from the same data set. And the data is not my arguments. My arguments do not constitute data. Nor does Ehrman's or Connor's, though they give no arguments. Both of them just simply assert that Jesus never claimed to be God. But the data we all work from is, what does the Bible actually say? You don't have to believe it's true, by the way. You don't have to believe Mark, the Gospel of Mark, was written by, you can believe it was written by a chimpanzee if you wish. You can believe that Jesus never existed if you wish. You can believe it's a total work of fiction if you wish. But just remember this, Ehrman states that in that writing, Jesus never claims to be God. Whether it's true or not is a different matter. And that's what we have to remember. Pure objective. You can be a total, never heard of Mark or Jesus or God before in your life. And if you ask that person, what is Jesus saying here in front of the Sanhedrin? I'm pretty sure. In fact, I have the 12-year-old test that I've always talked about. Just give the passage to a 12-year-old and ask them, what does it say here? Chances are the 12-year-old will give you kind of an Occam's razor type of what it seems to be saying at face value. They're not always right, mind you. There may be other factors at play. So let me get to Daniel chapter 7 here. So here's the situation. Daniel, who lived centuries before Christ, sees this vision, and I'm just going to quote here part of it. You see it on your screen here. I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man, and he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him, referring to the Son of Man, was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion. Now note that. It's an everlasting dominion. It'll never end. It says here, will not pass away, in his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. So that's the initial vision that Daniel sees here. And the question is, well, and this is what Jesus quotes from when the high priest asks him essentially, who are you? Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One? So Jesus literally quotes from this. So now the discussion shifts to, well, who is this one like a son of man? And if you read the comments below my video, you will see that they're arguing that the Son of Man here is not the same person as what the angel explains he means. So we need to look at, there are actually, and this is unusual, there are actually two explanations for that vision given in that same chapter after Daniel sees it. So he's wondering, what in the world? What's going on here? What's this? And the angel, the first is a very short one, and I'm just looking at verse 18 here. It says, but the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess this kingdom forever and ever. So I just want you to know, this is the explanation of this kingdom that the Son of Man will receive. And some people will say, well, the fact that he receives it from someone called the Ancient of Days shows that this is not God. But that is a bit of a circular fallacy in the sense that they're presupposing that God is not a triune God, that this is not the same thing. And you can presuppose that, but from other passages, that'll be difficult to defend. All I'm saying here is you don't have to assume the Trinity. You don't have to assume it's not true. All you have to say is, what is it saying here? This one like a son of man. So, but what's important to notice here is that this kingdom belongs to the Most High and the saints. In the vision, it belongs to the Son of Man and the people and the nations who will come under the Son of Man. The Son of Man is the folks in the vision. But in the explanation, the short one that the angel gives, he's saying it's the Most High who will rule forever and ever, and his saints. And then you get a little more longer explanation in verse 21. As I looked, this horn made war with the saints and prevailed over them. He's talking about the Antichrist here. Some people would argue. Irrelevant for my purposes. Until the Ancient of Days came. So you see the Ancient of Days being referred to again. And judgment was given for the saints of the Most High. And the time came when the saints possessed this kingdom. So again, he's talking about this eternal kingdom that belongs. In the vision, it was one like a son of man who rules over this kingdom forever and ever. Now in the explanations, we're being told it is the Most High who rules forever and ever. So you got, and then finally, the last one, the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. His kingdom shall be an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions will serve and obey him, which is his final explanation, slightly expanded, of what Daniel sees when he sees this Son of Man who rules forever and ever. So you have two choices. either the Son of Man and the Most High, who's continually referred to in the explanation. So the explanation describes this ruler who rules forever as the Most High. Either they're one and the same, or they're not one and the same. And so you then have to say, well, which makes more sense here in the context of the passage? Now, if they're not both the same, then suddenly this Son of Man becomes totally disconnected from the rest of the explanation, who is supposed to rule forever and ever. It's actually the Most High who rules forever and ever, not the Son of Man. Or is it the Son of Man? So you have a problem. You find that unless you accept it, the explanation at face value from what the angel says here, if you say they're not one and the same, the Son of Man and the Most High, then you have made for yourself an additional problem. In other words, one of the things we do in the analysis of a text is to see if your theory helps explain the text or creates more problems. And in this case, denying that they're one and the same actually creates more problems and makes the Son of Man totally redundant and of no use for the remainder of the explanation. It's just like suddenly he just disappears, and now the explanation is that the Most High rules forever and ever. Now, there is one thing that they argue, the response in the comments is that, well, the fact that it's the Ancient of Days who gives the Most High, or the Son of Man, this kingdom, that then there's a hierarchy here. But that's no surprise at all. In fact, if you read the New Testament and study through the relationship of the Father is the head of the Son, that's very clear. Jesus is subject to the Father before the incarnation. During the incarnation is just while he was here on earth and as a Son of Man. And after the incarnation forever and ever, you see that. There are passages that clearly spell that out, clearly explain or describe Jesus as being the subject to. So within the Trinity, you have the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. But the Son says, he doesn't say anything but what the Father says. And he describes the Holy Spirit. That the Spirit will not say anything. So you see that the Father is head of the Son. But at the same time, Jesus says, he who has seen the Son has seen the Father. In other words, you want to see the Father in physical form, you're looking at him. In fact, Paul goes on in his letter to the Colossians to say that all the fullness of deity dwells in Jesus Christ in bodily form. So the Father represents himself in the physical world, and we call that representation or that person the Son. There's clearly, but yet the Son does nothing on his own initiative. So again, that has to do with how the Trinity works. And it also has implications for humans who are created as tripart beings too, with the spirit, soul, and body, how they ought to work. But that's a whole nother discussion.
Okay, so is there anything, this was a long commented, I cut it in two here, but is there anything in here you wanted to address from Verticus Maximus? Like this is what he was talking a little bit about, the Ancient of Days and stuff, so that's why I brought this one up. But he says nowhere in Daniel 7 is the Most High related to the Holy Ones or the Son of Man.
Well, that's just an assertion, eh? And it's what I said. If you're going to make that assertion, if you're going to say they're not one and the same, then you have a problem. What in the world is the Son of Man doing here? Well, like he's just a fifth wheel, a redundant thing in the vision. And why is it that the explanation of that vision talks about everything except the Son of Man and substitutes the Son of Man out for bringing the Most High in? And that is very awkward. Requires more work because they're denying basically the explanation. So the explanation is making the Son of Man and the Most High equivalent. That's in the explanation, and we saw that occurs 3 times in there in different ways. Saints of the Most High is a key phrase here. Saints of what? Because this implies that, and the people, the saints are, basically we're not talking about the people who you see statues of here. Saints are just basically meaning the Kodashim. They're the holy ones, and they're people. As people, the word people is used there, so we're not talking about angels. We're talking about people, and the word people is used in Daniel 7 to describe these saints, these people that belong to God. Basically, if you belong to God, you become holy or holy in the sight of God, and that's what he's saying here.
Okay, so we'll end with this because I have a bunch of stuff I need to do. Also, as you noted, the I am answer is certainly not the name of Yahweh, just because he did not say something like I am the bread of life. Formula I am X. That is not the structure of the narrative, but it is the same result. It is like this: question, then an answer. What was the question? It was, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed?" What is the answer? It was, "I am." Now that is different without a distinction with the IMX formula. Thus, Jesus is saying, "I'm the Christ, the Son of the Blessed," and then he adds to it the Son of Man reference in Daniel, thus taking upon himself the roles of the Messiah and the Son of Man. He's saying he never actually claimed to be God. He just claimed to be the Christ, the Son of the Blessed.
Well, okay, that gets to he's getting stuck on the Greek here, ego eimi. And as I've argued, the Greek is actually being translated, and we don't know the Hebrew or the Aramaic term that Jesus used. So he's assuming that, and other places like he rightfully quotes, let's say, I am the bread of life, nobody accused him of blasphemy there. But if you were to say, well, then, if nobody's accusing him of blasphemy in that passage, what did he say in Hebrew? And then you will see if we had that, which we don't, but we can infer what he said in Hebrew was nothing controversial, nothing that's going to get people, well, it might be maybe controversial, but it's not going to get them stoned. Whereas, in other cases where he used ego eimi, and we ask the question, what did he say in Hebrew? And then we have to look at what the response of the crowd is. We see, oh, there is a very massive response here, they're accusing him of blasphemy. So then what you have to say, well, what he said in Hebrew, he's not saying ego eimi in Hebrew. He is probably saying, well, not probably, there's a very good reason, based on the reaction of the people, that what he said in Hebrew was the Hebrew word, the Hebrew phrase for I am. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Good video. There were a few comments here. Cyphus Ignitus never once mentions Yahweh. He always says the Father. Yahweh's not even mentioned in the New Testament. Why would that be?
Well, it's because he's not familiar enough with the New Testament, because, let's say, for example, in Hebrews chapter 1, thy throne, O God, is forever and ever. The Lord said to my Lord. So basically, what you would look for, now, in the New Testament, I think you asked that as a maybe slightly facetiously. New Testament, what we have today is written in Greek. So you're not going to see Yahya in you're going to see I am, or you're going to, I am normally. But sometimes the New Testament quotes from the Old, and that's what you have to look at. So the New Testament is quoting from the Old, and the Old, so you go back to the Old and it's the name of God here. Then, and this is what Jesus is, the big question is, what was Jesus saying in Hebrew that got him in such dire straits? And especially when he made this announcement before the religious, what did he say in Hebrew? And their reaction says it all. And it doesn't matter how ego eimi is used all over the place, because what we're really concerned is, what did he say in Hebrew that's translated to ego eimi, that other times when he uses ego eimi, it doesn't get him into trouble. So it's everything stands on what he said in Hebrew, and the only way we can tell is the reaction of the people. And the reaction of the people in the Sanhedrin is clearly, he said, well, he's committed blasphemy. He has claimed.
It's also clear, and I'm going to use the bad word here, context. Jesus was planning to die.
Mm-hmm.
And he was planning to die for a reason.
Yeah.
So he could have said, I'm not claiming to be God, just this.
Yeah. He could have clarified.
He could have clarified, but he
knew. He knew if he says that, he's going to die for sure. And he was the one who decided when the time was, and it was now time.
Yeah, and the disciples didn't get it. Nobody got it.
No.
And so when the context of the New Testament, when you put the Old Testament there, the whole Bible, there's a story. And you can take little pieces out of the story and say, oh, well, he didn't mean this, or it doesn't mean this. But the overall story, you can believe it or you can say it's fiction. You can say it's all made up. But the whole context of the story is a redemption plan. And it required somebody who is sinless to die for our sins.
Yeah.
Now,
it just rules out humans.
We can debate the Trinity. We can debate all that. But it doesn't make sense that he would be claiming just to be this little thing here.
Yeah. Although many of the people who would argue that he wasn't claiming to be God would also reject that he is the savior of humanity, that he is the one prophesied, and so forth. So, they will say those things. But explanatory power is very important. And if one denies that Jesus was claiming to be God in the Gospels, then they find they have even more things to explain. And Ehrman, I've noticed quite a few times, he'll use the word, it's complicated. And as a philosopher who has been involved in many formal debates, probably around 80 formal debates on university campuses, trained in critical thinking, when I heard the word preface, when I hear someone preface their explanation with, it's going to be complicated here, then my baloney alert immediately goes off. I know with a high degree of probability what I'm about to hear is sophistry. Now, that doesn't mean that all answers are not complicated. So what you have to do is look at the simplest explanation that explains all the data. And the simplest one that explains all the data is that he was actually claiming to be God. That totally explains the high priest's reaction, why everybody else reacted and said he was claiming to be God, and so forth. It also explains how this meshes flawlessly with the ancient prophecies. A lot of stuff falls into place. But if you deny that, then you have a lot of things that need explaining, and it gets very complicated. So using Occam's razor, you want to go with the least complicated explanation. That's more likely to be true. Doesn't mean it's true, but it's more likely to be true than a very complicated explanation that I would argue does not explain the data as well as the straightforward explanation. And in historiography, explanatory power, same in science, is very important. And the explanatory power sits firmly on the side that Jesus was actually claiming that he is none other than Yahuwah, which is the Hebrew word we get Jehovah from.
And it makes sense.
Everything actually meshes. There's a consistency there and a coherence that is not there if you want to deny that he claimed to be God.
All right. Well, good video. We will talk again probably next week. Welcome back. How was your Christmas?
Yeah, our first. I had a good Christmas. It's good to be back, but I had a super time at Christmas too. So
awesome. Okay. Well, we'll plan on next Thursday, and we'll see you then. Again. Hit the bell, subscribe, do all that stuff, comment, and we'll jump into the comments when we have a chance. All right, talk to you later.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye. How do I play this thing? They changed everything on me. All right, here we go.